In today's installment of the Let's Build series, we're going to take a look at Reshiram Charizard. So strap in, it's about to get hot. Welcome back to the channel, Little Flexers. Thank you so much for clicking on today's video. Today we have a Let's Build involving the Reshiram and Charizard League Battle Deck. I'll go over some of the strategies and tips that I have for you when you're looking to maybe modify this deck that can be obviously transported to other decks. And it would be a good insight for you to figure out how you can deck build just a little bit better. But first, if you haven't already, please make sure to go down below and click that big red subscribe button. Maybe even hit that bell so you can get notifications of when I go live with a video in the future. You can also leave me a comment, be much appreciated. Love to hear from you guys. So this is the deck that you would receive if you redeem the Reshiram and Charizard League Battle Deck. This is the exact 60 cards that would come in that package, and if you uploaded it onto PCGO, this is roughly what you would see. Maybe not with the full arts, maybe not with the reverse foil, but we still have the basic concept here. So one of the first things that I want to talk about is why the Pokemon are the way that they are. This deck is revolving around a greens engine, which is kind of the biggest focal point of the deck, and we don't want to change the structure too much in the sense that, you know, we could play this with a bunch of abilities, but I think generally speaking, the idea behind this really revolves around this greens card. So greens, you can only play this card if you have no Pokemon in play with abilities. So that means that if we wanted to play greens effectively, we're probably not going to be able to play Dedenne, probably not going to be able to play Crobat. You might be able to get away with something like a Marshadow or a Fion because those types of Pokemon can leave the field. But even so, that's a generally rough spot to be in if you start one of those Pokemon. And so we're just going to scrap all, of those powerful abilities that we otherwise would play in most other decks so that we can incorporate this really strong supporter. So if we don't have any Pokemon with abilities to play, we can search our deck for up to 2 trainer cards and put them into our hand. That is so good. I can't overstate how good that effect is. And honestly, I would play this supporter in every deck if I could, but so it goes, we can't quite do that, and so we're going to have to figure out a way to make our Pokemon work with this supporter. There are a ton of very strong items in the game, and so that Greens Exploration is going to allow us to search out things that can heal our Pokemon. It's going to allow us to search out things that can get energy. It's going to allow us to search out things that can disrupt our opponent. Maybe even force them to switch their active Pokemon. It can do so many things, and so Greens is quite a nice card for us. Now, let's look at the Pokemon here and why we have the Pokemon lineup that we do. So there is the Volcanion. This is the de facto best starter in the deck. With that Flare starter attack, going to let us search out energy from our deck to attach to our bench Pokemon. Now, this Volcanion is a blast when you start it second, right? Because you can search out 3 fire energy instead of just 1. Awesome card. And we want to make sure that we max out that for most effective usage, right? If we play less than 4, the odds decrease pretty significantly of starting that Pokemon. So we want to make sure that we max out that count. Generally speaking, when you're deck building, try to have the most that you can of any Pokemon that you really want to start. Coming into our attackers, this deck has included 2 different attackers. The Reshiram and Charizard GX here we see with the Outrage attack, the Flare Strike, and the Double Blaze attack. They all serve very similar functions. The Outrage attack is a really nice attack for cheap, but its attack damage is relying on how much your opponent swings into you for. So if they do 200 damage, then now all of a sudden your Outrage attack is doing 230 damage. But if they do 10 damage, then your Outrage attack is only doing 40 damage. So it's a really reactive attack, and we're generally not going to be aiming to use that, although it's very strong in certain situations. Flare Strike is really where this card shines. 230 damage. However, the Pokemon can't attack on the next turn. That's kind of the caveat there. And then we also have a very potent GX attack that can go through anything in the game, even those pesky Decidueyes. It is really strong, going through any effect on the opponent's Pokemon if we have 6 energy in play. So this is what I really want to focus on for this video in terms of attacker. The League Battle deck also comes with the Charizard Imbraction. This card is fine, but I think the versatility and straightforwardness of the Reshiram and Charizard is what we're going to want for this deck. So I'm actually going to opt to cut this in favor of a 3rd Reshiram and Charizard. So we've added our 3rd Reshiram and Charizard. We have our 4 Volcanion, and I like to flex a little bit. I got, 3 different arts. But this is what our deck list is going to look like in terms of the Pokemon count. We now move into the most important part of this particular deck in the trainers and supporters. So trainers are going to be the focal point of this deck because you have just so many options that you could search out for with the Greens Exploration. So let's take a look at some of the most powerful ones. Reset Stamp here is going to be a card that we absolutely must have in these decks because we are going to be a little bit slower than our opponent, and we want to build up resources in our hand. So one of the other really good cards for disrupting our opponent is going to be Marnie. And generally, you would want to play Marnie in just about every other deck. However, we can't play Marnie for two reasons. First reason, again, the Greens Exploration, we're going to try to build up resources into our hand. So putting them back into the deck is never really something that you want to do. Secondly, there are often going to be a lot of turns where we would like to use the Welder supporter. And Welder allows us to attach 2 energy to Pokemon to power them up quicker. So we have to decide between Greens Exploration and Welder. A lot of times, things like Marnie just slip through the cracks in terms of what we need to do on that turn. So Reset Stamp kind of fills that void. We can search it out with the greens, but not have to play a supporter, and we can still disrupt our opponent. Now, ideally, we play the Reset Stamp after maybe our opponent's knocked out a Volcanion, maybe they've knocked out a Reshiram and Charizard, and now they're all of a sudden down to 2 prizes left. We can go ahead and Reset Stamp them. Maybe they aren't drawing so well, and we can go ahead and swing the tide of the game in our favor. The other supporter that we're going to want to use that I just mentioned was the Welder supporter. This is a 4 of absolutely. I think our deck is going to revolve primarily around the Welder and the Greens Exploration, as well as the Pokegear 3.0 to try to search out both the Greens and the Welder. So with that in mind, I'm going to keep 4 Pokegear, I'm going to keep 4 Greens Exploration, and I'm going to keep 4 Welder as kind of the main engine of the deck. There's a lot of other auxiliary supporters here. I look at the Professor's Research, not a bad card, but since we're going to most often want to play Greens or Welder, I think I'm going to cut that back down to 1, give us a little bit of free space in our list. We also have Cynthia and Caitlin. Those are okay. Mallow and Lana is a really nice heal card, but not super necessary. I think Cynthia and Caitlin can absolutely go. We have enough draw with the rest of the deck that we should be okay. So let's go ahead and cut those Cynthia and Caitlin, again, making some more room. So now we're at the point in the deck building process where we have kind of cut the things that we definitely don't want, and now we have to start making decisions on where we want the deck to go. This is what I like to call the core concept of the deck. This is where you have, your main strategy is kind of outlined as a little bit of like a mission statement, for instance, with a company. So you have, okay, I could either go a very offensive route and try to make my deck do 230 damage with the Reshiram Charizard as quickly as possible, or I can maybe take a more defensive and healing route. And I think those two kinds of strategies work really well for the style deck. So I'm going to choose, for the sake of this deck building profile, to choose the healing route and show you what this deck might look like if you're trying to keep your Reshiram and Charizard alive for as long as possible. So a big card to facilitate that is the Mallow and Lana. I also really like Great Potion as another potential option for that heal. So let's go ahead and increase that to 4. One of the big cards that we can also use to increase the HP of our Reshiram and Charizard is Big Charm. And I like the fact that we have space for tools in here with the Vitality Band, but since we're going the defensive strategy, let's go ahead and cut these Vitality Band and replace them with Big Charm. So now we have Big Charm, and we've maxed out the count of Great Potion to 4 in our deck, and we're trying to figure out how else we can best facilitate this kind of healing strategy. And I think one of the ways we could do it is by trying to further slow our opponents down. And there's one really big card that I look to that stops Pokemon with abilities from being played. It doesn't stop every Pokemon with an ability from being played, but it stops the GX Pokemon, notably Dedenne, from really having an impact. And that is, of course, Power Plant. So we have Giant Hearth, which is a really strong card for our deck, but I also would maybe look to include Power Plant to try to slow down our opponents in the early game. We can play both stadiums. That's absolutely not a problem, but I would look to include a couple copies of Power Plant to give us that edge against decks that really rely on Dedenne to set up. So this is the list that kind of comes more into focus. Again, we've cut out some of the things that maybe were a little more offensive in favor of some cards that were a little more defensive. And now we have a list that is a little more fine-tuned. A lot of times, what people will show me if they're making decks, they show me a lot of decks that have 2 different opposing strategies. They're trying to fit in the attacker while also trying to fit in the heal, or they're trying to combine kind of a stall tactic with a very offensive build. And sometimes that just middle ground doesn't work. Sometimes the middle ground does work. But I think in this case, we want to choose one side or the other and really lean into that. If you remember our original deck, it only had 2 Great Potion. You know, it didn't have any of the big charm, but instead had Vitality Band. And I think those kind of work at odds with each other. To round out this deck, I think there are a few things that you could opt to include. The special fire energy would be a nice little addition to boost the HP of your fire Pokemon. Something like an air balloon to retreat out your Volcanion when you're done attacking with it would be a nice little inclusion. And maybe a 4th Pokemon catcher to give you a little bit more insurance when there are turns that you need to gust. But I think overall, this is a very solid concept now that we've kind of incorporated those ideas that we talked about earlier in the video. So now that we have a finished Reshiram and Charizard list, it's time for you to go check it out. That's all for me today. Remember guys, good luck and also have fun.